Let me introduce myself. My name is Dr. Dilip Raja. I'm a practicing urologist and andrologist in city of Mumbai for the last 30 years. Um, it's been a long story, long journey where I started off my journey in Calcutta, where I did my MBBS and MS and I was a gold medalist there. Subsequently, from there I moved to Bombay, and before moving to Bombay, I went around the world. I went to UK, I went to Belgium, where I did a course on microsurgery. Then from there I went to USA, Mayo Clinic, where I did my reconstructive urology and things. From there where I went to Australia, where I did my infertility and impotency training and things. And then finally settled down in Mumbai. I am attached currently. In between, a lot of things have happened, but that's a history now. But today, currently, I'm attached to Leelavati Hospital, Saifi Hospital, Wockhardt Hospital, and Breach Candy Hospital. I attend. I also have a practice in Dubai, which I go visit as a visiting urologist once in a month, and see the patients, consult there, and operate there. And think I'm holding a license. In between these many years, there was another aspect of my practice or a charitable work which we had taken, which had taken me to various countries like in the East Africa, to Kenya, Tanzania, Mauritius, Zanzibar, Zambia, uh, and all those islands, Seychelles, and all those places where we had conducted workshops, camps, and did a lot of charitable work there. Teaching has always been my hobby. I do have a postgraduate, but we do conduct a lot of these lectures, classes for the public, for the education and the self-awareness creating. Having said that, we will come back to today's topic, which is a kidney stone in management. The audience which I see here is, I don't think so you are in that age group, but it is an important thing to know because you may have children, you may have grandchildren who probably would like to, you would like to see or have a knowledgeable or, like treat them or know about it. Kidney stones, if you look at the incidence, the male to female ratio is about 3:1. If there are 3 men suffering compared to that women, you may ask why is that so, but that's an incidence which is all over the world. It's more common in younger people. Generally, it is detected between 30 and 40 active years of life. However, it is not uncommon to have a stone in a child as well as in an elderly person. Higher incidence in a stone belt zone. You may ask, what is a stone belt zone? In India, we have certain places like Gujarat, Rajasthan, which is a dry area where there is a lot of desert and things like that. These are the dry zones, which are called stone belt zone. Similarly, in the world, you have North America, you have Dubai, and you have Gulf countries where the climate is hot, dry, and that's where the stones are probably formed more. Many reasons and the causes, will come to that subsequently. But before that, if you look at these stones, these are real stones and they are not picked up from the streets. These are the various type of the stones that we get it in our body. If one look at it, will possibly tell you what kind of a stone is made of. For example, this is a soft, mushy kind of a thing which is easily breakable. These are calcium oxalate stones. These are hard pebbles like a rock, very hard to break or practically impossible to break. Even if you take a hammer and tuck, it doesn't break. These are called cystine stones. This is known as a staghorn stone. If you see, it has taken a shape of a stag's horn. It has got multiple arms because that is the shape of the kidney. Within the kidney calyces, these are upper, middle and the lower calyces, it takes the shape of that kidney. And these are generally a bladder stone which is normally situated into the bladder, urinary bladder, and become bigger and bigger. So these are the various kind of stones, and ultimately these are the various stones are infective stones, and you can have mixed stones where you can have calcium, oxalate, uric acid, cystine, infective, and all mixed together. It's not necessary that if you have calcium you cannot have infection on it. So you have all various kind of stones present in our body. Hence, if you look at the anatomy, the kidneys are the 2 organs, bean-shaped organs, which are situated in the back of the kidney. which acts as a filtering apparatus. I guess we have about an hour or 45 minutes. So this kidneys act as a filtering substance. It is a solid part and which drains that filtrate into a hollow tube, which is called the ureter. And then the urine comes down into the bladder, which in the male passes through a long urethra, in the female it passes through a short urethra. So this is by and large the anatomy of a kidney, ureter, bladder and the urethra. And the stones, they can be formed anywhere. It could be into the kidney. If this is the solid part of the kidney, which is acts as a filtration apparatus through the which all the waste that we like eat and drink the food, the waste product is which forms into the form of a urine, gets collected into this, and through this tube it comes down in a pulse like manner. And this is where if there is a stagnation of this urine anywhere for some reason, the formation of the stone takes place. So if the stone is formed here, this is called a pelvic stone. If the stone is formed here, it is a calyx. These are called calyceal stones. This is a ureter, so it is a ureteric stone. I showed you a stone which is a staghorn. You see, it is the arms are going into each calyces. So this becomes a staghorn stone, and these are the bladder stones. So the stone can primarily form in any part of the urinary system, but generally it gets filtered from the top. A nucleus comes, then slowly, so it just doesn't come like a stone. Small crystals come, then on top of it the deposition takes place and the stones are formed. So you have the types of the stone: calcium oxalate stone, uric acid stone, cystine stone, triple phosphate stone and the mixed stones. How does one know that you have a stone? Most common symptom one gets is a pain, and probably this is the condition why people reach us easily, is because they get pain. So the pain is classically of this time, starts from the back, goes in the front, goes down towards the genital and sometimes radiates to the thigh. Some may take it as a spinal backache problem, but backache is more of a central problem. This is more of a lateralized, maybe on the right side or on the left side. It is normally a very colicky pain. Colicky means it suddenly doubles you up. You get such a severe colicky pain that you double up. You feel something is stuck around. You move around, you jump, you dance, you want to shake off something, but things don't move. And this kind of a colicky pain, which is we classically describe is from the loin to the groin. And this is described as worse than the labor pains. If anybody has seen anyone in a labor, you can imagine that lady how much she is in pain. When somebody suffers from this kidney stone pain, it's even worse pain than that. So you can imagine the severity which what they get. So you get a severe abdominal or a flank pain. Along with that, you may have some urinary symptoms. You may either have if the stone is moving closer down from the ureter into the bladder, you may have irritative symptoms. You may have more frequency, urgency. You may pass blood into the urine. And because of this colic, it may be associated with nausea, vomiting, whatever. So all these kind of symptoms are not one by one occurs, but they may collectively happen, and one can, looking at or hearing the story, can literally we can say that this person has probably got a stone. So what are the causes? Most common cause, diet. Second is water intake, urinary output, climate, occupation, hereditary and other causes. Out of which if you look at the diet, important thing comes out here is what is the stone made of. We saw the types of the stone: calcium oxalate, uric acid, cystine and things. So those substances which are what we eat are more in that quantity. Like what is rich in calcium? Milk. So if somebody is used to drinking 3 glasses of milk, and together with that if his water intake is less, what happens? That calcium is filtered through those nephrons and gets deposited into the kidney. If it is a good water intake, it gets flushed out. But if it's not intake, they go and settle down. And then another particle comes, another particle comes, another particle comes, and they form a stone. So the diet which is rich in the substances which form the stone will lead to the formation, combined with less water intake. Urinary output. Many a times people say, you must drink a lot of water. Now, to me, drinking more water makes no sense. You may be in Rajasthan. You may drink 5 liters of water, but don't pass more than a liter of urine also, because most of it you get dehydrated. Most of the water is being utilized by the body and the urine doesn't come out. So, what is important? How much is the urine coming out? You have to balance. Somebody says, oh, doctor, when we tell them that you must drink a lot of water, he comes and says, oh, doctor, I drink a lot of water. So, when you ask him, how much is your lot of water? Oh, I used to drink 2 glasses, now I drink 4 glasses, so I drink a lot of water. Now, that 4 glasses is also under. So, it doesn't make sense. So, you have to ask him, how much urine do you pass? Nobody will be able to answer that question, that how much urine, because we don't measure our urine. So, on an average, one has to be aware that you must pass, normal individual will pass 1 to 1.5 liters of urine in 24 hours. A person with the stone disease should pass more than 2.5 liters of urine. These are the general rules which I am talking about. We are not talking about this in relation to the patients who have either a cardiac disease or have a kidney failure, where the water intake is restricted because of those conditions. But otherwise, normally this should be the story. So, similarly, climate, I already mentioned, if you have a dry, hot climate, you need to take, normally if you need to pass 2 liters, if you need to drink 3 liters, in a climate like this, you might need to drink 5 liters to pass 2.5 liters. So, climate plays an important, sometimes an occupancy. Occupation, it has been seen that the kidney stones are formed in those who have sedentary jobs, desk job, office goers. But if you see any poor man who is working in the field, who is a laborer, hardly will form a stone. All those executives sitting in the banks, in the stock markets and things, if you will see that they are most of the time, they don't have time even to drink water. They don't have time to do any exercise. They are running from one meeting to the other meeting. They don't drink enough water. They don't do enough exercise. So, these are the people who tend to probably accumulate more those stone forming substances in the kidney. Laborer who works poor guy hard, he comes and he takes one full handa and dak he drinks, because he is so thirsty. So, he is the guy who is not going to form a stone. I already mentioned about there could be hematuria, means blood in the urine, renal colic, nausea and hydronephrosis. Hydronephrosis is a radiological condition whereby if you look at this, there is a stone. It's like if you have a wash basin and if you have a drainage pipe, if you block the drainage pipe, what happens? And the tap, if you keep it open from there, what happens? All the water will come back and then there is a backflow. Similarly, this stone is blocking this tube, so the urine is not going down, so it is accumulated here. This is a normal pelvic calyceal system whereby a normal urine comes from the filtration and goes down. But if I block it here with a stone, then the backflow takes place, and which pushes back pressure onto the kidney. And this condition is called hydronephrosis, and this hydronephrosis, if it is allowed to say, the back pressure on the kidney increases till a stage when this kidney starts, the solid substance starts getting pressurized and then it stops functioning. And in a very late stage, you may find that this kidney stops functioning because of the presence of the stone, because of timely not removing that obstruction. So, that is an extreme situation. But before that, normally the patient will complain of pain and come for some help. That's when we treat the patients. So, how do you diagnose? Suppose if once you have heard patient complains of pain, now you need to be sure what you have to do. So, you do a routine urine examination, simple thing, to check whether there is infection, pus cells are there or not, red blood cells are not, that means blood is there or not. Urine examination will also tell you whether the patient is diabetic or not, whether there is sugar or not. It will also tell you whether there is other ailments like hepatitis or jaundice or anything is there, we'll come to know. But by and large, it is the reds. Plus, if there is a medical kidney disease, the urine report will also tell you whether there are cast crystals or things like that are not, so that tells us that there is a medical renal disease associated. It's not necessary that if you have a stone, you can't have any other disease in the kidney. You can have that. So urine examination gives us basic but a lot of information. Next is plain simple. Today is the time of scan. Anything happens, we send the patient straight for a CT scan. No. Even today, the simple clinical medicine do exist. You look at the patient, he's coming, tossing and turning, young man, all those conditions which I have described, do a plain X-ray and you will see the stone. Next thing you do is an ultrasound exam. Simple test. It will tell you whether there is a hydronephrosis or not, whether the kidney is swollen or not, whether there is a stone. It will not tell you anything about the function of the kidney, but it will tell you whether there is any abnormality in the kidney. That's all. The next thing, if you want to know the function of the kidney, you want to anatomy, the pathway, then you do a X-ray called intravenous urogram, what we popularly known as IVP or IVU. This is the urine examination. So these are the investigation. Other than that urine examination, you also do certain blood tests whereby you can do CBC creatinine. Creatinine is one such blood test which reflects the function of the kidney. If you have two kidneys and out of which if 2/3 of both the kidneys fail, not one, just hydronephrosis will not give rise to elevated creatinine. But if the kidney, 2/3 of both the kidneys fail, then the creatinine starts rising. Normal value is about 0.4 to 1.2, but it will start going up if both the kidneys are obstructed, or one kidney is obstructed and another has a or small contracted kidney and things like that, then the creatinine. So creatinine is an important test, and you must do this test before doing any IVP or a CT scan with contrast, because all these contrast materials are damaging to the kidney. We don't inject any contrast unless the creatinine is done. These are the other things, ASO titer and things like that, to find out whether there is any parenchymal disease of the kidney present or not. Urine culture, microscopy and culture, you can do it. IVP, retrograde pyelography, ultrasound, I already mentioned. If you can't figure out from here, and if you have to still further investigate, you may do a cystoscopy, you may do a ureteroscopy, you may do a CT scan, and whatever. This is more non-invasive. Cystoscopy and ureteroscopy are more of an invasive test. Depending on what we find and how we suspect, we move on further from this basic investigation to the advanced investigation. And many of time these investigations does not remain to the limit of investigation, they become the therapeutic model also. If there is a stone, if we put up a ureteroscope, we pick up the stone and come out. If it's a large stone, we blast it and we come out. If we can use laser, we can use lithoclast and blast it and we can flush it out. So sometimes this diagnostic and therapeutic, there is a overlap in an advanced stage. So what is IVU? We have already talked about it. You normally give a contrast media, a dye is injected and taken an X-ray which goes and colors the urine white. So on an X-ray you can see this pelvic calyceal system, this ureter and this bladder, everything into one unit. So you can make out what is the situation, and when that dye is excreted by this kidney, it can excrete only when it is functioning. So we get to understand the function of the kidney as well. This is an ultrasound, non-invasive tape. Patient lies supine on the table, kidney lying on the back. So we put up an ultrasound probe and we scan it and we can see it on a screen up there. This is a cystoscopy, whereby a long narrow tube is passed into the urinary passage and we look inside the bladder. So once you have diagnosed the kidney stone, you need to treat that stone. How do you treat that? If you have the stone situated in the minor calyx, the treatment could be different. If the stone in the pelvis, treatment could be different. If the stone in the ureter, the treatment could be different. One is a medical treatment. Whenever a patient comes to us, the first and the foremost treatment, because he's come to us in pain. So first and foremost thing, we use various type of painkillers to give him relief. First job is to make him comfortable. Give him painkillers so he gets relief, and then we investigate and then we go to the treatment. Now in the treatment you have various modes. ESWL, that is extracorporeal shock wave lithotripsy. I don't think so I need to elaborate there. Everybody knows what it is. This technique, I will tell you how it was invented and all that. The second one is a PCNL, that is percutaneous nephrolithotripsy, that is making a hole in the back and passing a telescope through that, that is called PCNL. URS, that is ureteroredoscopy. That means a fine, slender, long instrument is passed through the urinary passage under vision, and we can see everything on a TV screen, and which goes into the ureter all the way up to the kidney, and we can identify a tumor or a stone or whatever it is. RIRS is a new terminology whereby it is retrograde insertion, means through the urinary passage we have a flexible scopes which are available, which we go up and right into the calyx, for which earlier we used to do PCNL, now we can do by RIRS, or you may use a combination of all four of them or any two of them. I'll explain each one of them separately. Other things in the lithotripsy, you could use the laser, percutaneous ESWL, we talked about it. Both this ESWL and PCNL, both these technologies were invented in 1980. PCNL did not have much research, whereas ESWL came up after almost about 10 or 12 years of research. How the research started? There was a pilot and a surgeon, urologist. The gentleman by the name of Christian Chaussy, he was one of the first person who invented this. I had the pleasure of sharing a session with him on the chair, because I was one of the first urologists in India to start lithotripsy, and he was the first urologist in the world to start this lithotripsy. So he had visited us and we had conducted a session together. So that was my proud privilege to have sharing a chair with him. Now, very interestingly, how Chaussy, Christian Chaussy was his full name, very dynamic, and he probably now must be around 75, 80, but still I saw him last year. He could walk the corridor of a hotel faster than I could. He goes. I said, okay, here the man comes. No wonder there is a. This gentleman had a friend who was a pilot, who used to fly those bomber aircrafts. So every time he used to fly, this Christian Chaussy, when he used to free from his surgery, both of them go to a bar and have a beer. That was their routine program. Whenever he would fly an aircraft or he would do a surgery, they would both share. They were childhood friends and growing up together. So one day that pilot complained to him. He says, Doc, I'm worried today. He said, what happened? He said, when I landed my bomber, you know how the bomber is, that beak and thing, like one of the sturdiest aircrafts in the world. He said, I saw some dents there on my aircraft. So he said, what? And then he said, you are a scientist. Tell me, why should there be a dent? Then they came to a theory that at that high altitude, there is almost water in the air, and probably you were going at such a high speed, so there was a clash between the metal clash between the speed and the water, and think that this is a hard object and that is water, and it probably caused a dent. Both of us crashed over it, finished the beer, went off. Christian Chaussy couldn't sleep that night. So he said, what is this? Let me do, why my friend is in trouble? I have to find him a solution. So he started thinking. And that thought process led to the research of this ESWL. I will not go into the long story of it. And then they started blasting a high sound. What is a high sound frequency? That kind of a speed. It's only the sound, either the light or the sound which travels at that speed after that kind of an aircraft. Then so they use an ultrasound for that high frequency waves. And they took a solid particle into a bowl and they used an ultrasound probe to break that. And surprisingly, that stone started showing the dents. The research went on, and first they did it outside, then they went into the animals, and then finally this machine was made, which initially costed 4 crores of rupees in those days. In India, this came in 86. In India, see, America, whatever used to make it, this one came out in Germany. FDA had approved in about 83 or 84, and we got it in 86, 87, 88. Normally in those days, whereby any technology used to come to America, it used to take 10 years to come to India. This technology, we got it so quickly. I still remember the date, 6th of August, 1986, I think, yes. That happened when we blasted the first stone in Bombay. It was a small place in Khar where we had put up this machine, and we had our first patient on the table. People from Germany, the press, the media, everybody was there taking pictures. All of us were new to it. But the hype was so much, patient was anesthetized and stones were blasted. And it was a big thing. And almost for a year, that was the only unit in the country. So in 1 year, we treated about more than 1,000 to 1,200 patients by lithotripsy. So, like every day we were sitting on the machine, It means on an average about 3 patients, 2 to 3 patients a day. And it's not only 2 to 3. When the stones were larger, they would require a second sitting and a third sitting. So every day I used to have a long list of 10 to 12 patients after the very first month. So every patient would take 1 hour. Initially, localization would take us 2 hours, 3 hours, because we didn't know how to do it. We would press a button and the table will run there. We press another button, table will run there. So we all had to go to Germany, get trained. We had those Germans, because they were also new. We all learned it together. And that's how this thing. Whereas PCNL came to this world not with so much fanfare. They said, there is a kidney, let's puncture the kidney. And somebody, brave fellow, he put a needle there and he hit the stone. So celebrate. So let's make the track bigger. So made the track bigger. First kidney, they had to remove the kidney because poor guy bled so much. But scientists are scientists. Whatever you have, we have to survive in those kind of situations. Today, if you ask me, that we used to, it's shocking that for a kidney stone of 1 centimeter size, we used to make such a big cut. Patient used to stay for a week in the hospital. 2 bottles of blood were given to remove that one spot. Today, he drives his car, comes, lies down on the table, gets blasted, drives his car back to work. So today, if somebody opens up a kidney for criminal, he can really be put in behind the bars because it's criminal now. But it's same Dr. Raja did it about 25 years ago. That time I was considered God. Oh wow, look at this stone he has taken out. But today if I take it out that way, I'll be straight behind the bars. So anyway, look at this. This is this unit which I had plenty of hair at that time. I was much younger. And this is one of the pictures. I have saved it from there. We had a remote control here. And the patient used to lie on a faraway table like this. This was the table which Christian Chaussee worked on in Germany when the first unit had come out. It was so much so that this patient had to be anesthetized. Patient was strapped completely, you see, tied up, and literally like how they tow away the motor car. The patient used to be towed away and literally dropped into a bathtub because you needed a combination of a water and a solid media. So this is how they used to treat the patient. That was in 84. In 87, 86, we got a table which was a second and a third generation machine, which is even going on today. It's little modification here and there, but we are still using this kind of a machine. You can see the difference. Here the patient comes and lies down on this table. These are X-ray tubes. We visualize on this 2 X-ray units, and this is the table where I was sitting here. If you see, this is the table where I am sitting there and watching this unit and treating away. This is a lead glass in between so that the radiation doesn't affect us. So this is how we treat the lithotripsy. Whereas the PCNL, you make a hole at a small 1 centimeter hole at the back, make a track, make a dilatation, pass a telescope through this, and you visualize the stone again on a TV, and you can remove the stone. If it's a big stone, you blast it, use laser, use lithoclast, whatever it is, various technologies. Advantage, this was a high-tech surgery, barely visible puncture mask. This is also 1 centimeter hole which will fill up. Excellent for large stones, short hospital stay, and it was quite safe. What are the indications? Where you have a large stone like a staghorn stones, if there is associated obstruction, or the stones, as I was telling you, that you can't break. These are the ones which cystine stones, uric acid stone, calcium oxalate, monohydrate stones, or when lithotripsy fails, then we use a PCNL for this. So PCNL could be a one-step procedure. If there is a pus collected into the unit, first we need to drain out. You have to make it safe. Then you just put up a nephrostomy. then you do the tract dilatation, and then you do the surgery. Puncture, you take the urine for analysis, you need to give antibiotics, and if before and after and during. Two-stage procedure, you first do a nephrostomy, send the patient back, allow the kidney to settle down, let the creatinine things come down to normal, and then you can take him up on a second day. Nowadays, we don't need to do too much of a second stage because of the modern antibiotics, modern treatment. Now, if forget about two-stage procedure. Earlier, we would never think of attempting 2 kidneys at a time. Today, we do both the sides kidney at the same time, whether it's ureteroscopy or PCNL, because we have so much excellent drainage, we have so much excellent antibiotics, so much excellent instruments available. And this PCNL is becoming smaller and smaller. Instrument we used to use this big, now we use this tiny instruments to take out the stone and blast it. This is just the these are a few videos I thought would be interesting for you to see. Even if I can show you one video, I'll be happy. I think this one moved. The wire is going, goes with the stone. You go with the endoscope, and you can see the stone there, and I would have showed you the whole blasting and everything there. Unfortunately, I am unable to. This is always, we find this as a problem in certain systems. It works, certain places the video doesn't work. So anyway, this URS is ureteroscopy, which I told you, a slender instrument which we pass. This could be certain associated complications. This is again a very old slide. We don't see so many of these complications nowadays. These complications used to happen mucosal denudation, extravasation and perforation and ureter evolution. All this, why? Because the diameter of the ureter itself was about 7 millimeters. And this ureteroscope diameter when invented was about 9 millimeters. So what the scientists, when it was invented, we said we will dilate the ureter and we'll go up and down. But what happens, you dilate only the lower part, you can't dilate the whole ureter. So then we had to force this through that kind of a tubing. So naturally from a 7 millimeter, when you pass a 9 millimeter, you will not go forward. So you go right and left and you puncture and perforate, and that would lead to disaster. So again, science is one such a thing that we always learn from our own mistakes. So the scientist who invented itself was in news. Oh, now we can enter this. But then when they invented the bigger one, because the companies or the manufacturers couldn't manufacture anything smaller than that. We knew that the diameter we need a smaller, but the best the company could give was a 9. So we said, let's use 9. We will try and find a way. Then the companies became wiser, the doctors became wiser. They said 9 abundant, we need 7. Now we need 5. Now we have got up to 3 also. So, like this is the matter of evolution. This is what, it's like how a Tarzan used to go around with her leaves. Now we wear a suit, something like that. So then once we found that kind of a situation that we could reach the ureter from below, we could use the ureter from behind. So we said, why not we then go from above? If we can go from down, if we can go from here, let's invent something where suppose something here, because this was far for the ureteroscope. So invented another instrument, the flexible ones, which could go from here, which could go from below. We can come here, go into various pockets. That is called the RIRS, or the flexible ureteroscopy. So this is called an antegrade nephroureteroscopy. This was again another video, but not to be seen, not for our eyes. This is also, if you see the basketing of the stone, which was a 1-minute video, but doesn't work for me. This was without a guide wire, another video. Okay, so these are the few things that we do. Now here are basically, just to give this idea to the audience, that these are the, in urinary system, besides getting that pain and blood and things like that, these are the symptoms which generally draws the attention of anybody, whether it is a child, adult, male, female, or old age. That if you have any of these symptoms, it has its own significance at various age groups. Slower weak stream, difficulty in starting the urination, urine comes in intermittently, doesn't come with one flow, post-void dribbling, you find somebody in a movie hall interval is standing there, he stands there more longer than the guy who comes next door, comes quickly, runs, unzip, pees and goes away. So this man is taking a longer time because he is dribbling, still at the end of it he is not happy. If somebody of this age group in the age of 50 plus comes, we think of prostate. Somebody in a younger age group, we think of infection. Somebody who is otherwise in the elderly group also we think of infection. But these are basically certain signs of obstruction, whether it's a stricture, whether it's a prostate or either whatever it may be. So these are the few disturbances in the urinary system which cause. Now having said that, I am just adding that new terminology which said RIRS. It is a retrograde intrarenal surgery. It means same way like a ureteroscope we go from below, but it goes into the kidney. Ureteroscope could never bend into the kidney. This one goes and bends into the kidney. It's endoscopic surgery for the management of pathology within the renal collecting system using a retrograde closed approach. In case if there are some stones which are left after lithotripsy, not obliging because one has to drink a lot of, some stone is got stuck there, not coming out, but giving you infection again. So what do? We pass this kind of a thing, goes into one of those pockets, pick up the stone and come out. So this is a complementary to those things, or sometimes even primarily, some stones are sitting in the lower calyx, whereby ureteroscope can't go. PCNL is too much of a procedure. How that 1 centimeter stone I can't think of opening up. Same way for a 1 centimeter stone I can't think of doing a PCNL today, because we feel it's too much of a procedure. So RIRS is the kind of a candidate for this, whereby we pass from a normal urinary passage, we have the arms which bends on two sides, goes into a pocket, pick up that stone or use laser to blast it and whatever and bring them out. So it can be RIRS assisted ESWL, stones up to 2.5 centimeters, or into a Stagon you can use a combination of RIRS and the ESWL. And in Stagon stone, when ESWL and PCNL are not to be technically or medically, sometimes some patient has got a bad heart, somebody has got a bad uncontrolled, somebody has got a brain stroke, but he has a stone which needs to be removed. This is much safer because in PCNL you have to turn the patient upside down, you have to pass a lot of water, there could be water absorption, there could be complications related to that. This becomes a much safer technology. Sometimes it is used for the diagnosis also. Sometimes you have something but no stones. You may have a tumor, you may have a cancer, you may have anything. So you can use it for the diagnosis of cancer or some obstructive pathology still inside that. The technique is upper tract abscess, you can do it, optical dilatation, this is technology, technically I will not go into the details of it, but these are again a slender instrument which at the tip has a flexibility. So we pass from below through a rigid tube and we go into the kidney and there we move these arms with a remote control here. Remote control on the hands, obviously, it's in the hands. So there we can see it on the screen that where it is bending. I wish I could show you the videos, otherwise I would have showed you those also. Here I also have a video here. This is a rigid scope and this is the flexible scope. This is we use for the ureteroscopy and this is a flexible ureteroscope. which is like a slender tube which goes in various compartments. This is how the flexible ureter. This is the curve you see, which goes into various calyces. Wherever we have a control, we move it like a. It's what has happened is this has become like a child's game, a video game. He keeps on playing with it. Fortunately, it has not become that. Otherwise, every child would become a urologist. So this is how. So you see the arm bends here, and you can see the stone. You can pass a laser fiber through this and blast it, or you can suck it out through the again you can or you can leave those fragments there only, which subsequently patient passes out with the urine. This is another stone, lower calyx and failed ESWL, same kind of a technology. We have about 10-15 minutes more, so I will just talk a little bit about the prevention. You have understood how to get the patient, how to diagnose it, what investigations do, and how to treat it. Now, most important question which every patient of mine, doctor, फिर से तो नहीं होगा ना? Now, no urologist under this sun can give you a guarantee that once I treat you as stone. On the contrary, we always say once a stone former is always a stone former. So we have to prepare it like that, and that he has to.
He changes his lifestyle.
There is no guarantee that he will not form. Even in spite of all the preventive measures I will talk about, that gives you no guarantee that you will not form stones. So, and even if you do nothing, if you don't take any preventive measures, you may not form, and you take all the preventive measures and you may still form. So this is only prevention, we can talk about it, but there is no foolproof guarantee. So here we have to understand that what are the principles of a prevention. Prevent supersaturation. I always give an example to all my patients that if you take half a glass of water or a beaker of water and keep on adding sugar or a salt in it, what will happen? A certain stage it will dissolve. You keep on adding more and more, a stage will come where it will settle down at the bottom. You keep on adding more, it will become a gattha. Kidney stone is just the same. That is called as theory of supersaturation. So water and more water, enough to make 2 liters of urinary output. So that's why I say how much I have not mentioned here. I have said about the output. Prevent solute overload by low oxalate and moderate calcium intake and treatment of the hypercalciuria. Hypercalciuria means high level of calcium into the blood. Either it could be high level of calcium into the urine, or it could be high level of calcium into the blood, which is a metabolic disorder. So if you have a high level of calcium filtering into the kidney, it is bound to get deposited. And at that time, if you flush it out with water, it will not get deposited. But if you reduce the water intake, then, but say for example, if you go to Rajasthan, or if you go to Dubai, or if you go to desert areas, if I ask you to drink more water, I am your enemy. Why? You will say, doctor, you told me to drink a lot of water and pass a lot of urine. I live in Rajasthan and I drink so much water, but I still form a stone. It's the quality of the water. Rajasthan water cannot be imported from Mumbai. So they will form water from what is available there, and which is a hard water. So there are a lot of minerals and things like that. So if that hard water he is drinking, he is doing the same thing, or probably more than what somebody is drinking a glass of milk. So you have to understand the situation where it is applicable. So that is where prevent solute overload, replaces solubilization, that is a citrate. You have to add something to it which kind of neutralizes. Citrate is one of these neutralizing agents. Manipulate pH in case of uric acid. We all know that average urine is acid in nature, where the pH is around 7. If you have the pH of 8 and 9, you become alkalinized. If you have a pH lesser than, you become more acidic. Now here, uric acid are stones which are formed in that situation where you need to neutralize that acid. So you have to keep on checking the pH accordingly, and thus accordingly you have to add either a neutralizer or accordingly to the water to kind of neutralize that acid pH into the urine. Flush, force water intake after any dehydration. So higher fluid, general measures are higher fluid intake, low animal protein diet, low sodium diet, dietary calcium is controversial. Calcium cannot be prevented, particularly in a woman. Post-menopausal age, if you say don't take calcium, on the contrary, they are given calcium pills, isn't it? Because otherwise they will have osteoporosis. The bones will break. So preventing that I will not form a stone or preventing a bone fracture is more important. So I think it is better to take calcium in that situation. Avoid stone-provoking drugs like calcitrol, calcium supplements, loop diuretics, probenecid, like calcium supplements and things. Why? Only if you are in a different situation. As I said, in post-menopausal, you cannot do that. Low calcium diets are generally recommended except for the true absorptive hypercalciuria, whereby a person is passing more than normal calcium in the urine. That is where you have to restrict the diet, otherwise not. Evidence shows that limiting calcium, especially in women, can lead to osteoporosis and does not prevent renal stones. Avoid intake of oxalate containing food, example spinach, strawberries, rhubarb tea, peanuts and wheat bran. You should avoid intake of these things. During the day, drink fluids, ideally water every 1 to 2 hours. See, at nowhere I am giving you a total quantity as to how much you will drink. I am giving you a guideline. But stress is on the output, not in the input. Drink 2 glasses of water at bedtime and additional glass at each night time awakening to prevent the. I don't advise this because a man becomes miserable if he has to get up 3 times at night. All those people who are prostate patients and if they have to get up 3 times at night, they run, they say, doctor, I can't sleep, kindly do something for this. So the night is, I tell them, you drink as much as you drink in the water, restrict your after 7 o'clock and get up in the morning and start drinking again. Nothing is going to happen if you don't get up in the middle of the night to drink water. This is just a basic chart. In the food, if you have to take a low calcium, low oxalate diet, if you have to allow and to avoid. In the food, beverages, you can carbonate and cereal beverages, limit tea, coffee, 3 cups either. Malted beverages, milk, chocolate beverages are to be avoided, that is milk and milk products. Breads and cereals, white and wheat bread, donuts, pastries, sweet rolls, you can have it. But all bran, pancakes, waffles, wheat bread, 100% avoid. Now, see, these are again a paradox. We all say that brown bread is good for the heart and things like that, but I say don't eat that. So one goes home confused, he says, ये क्या करेगा? कल जो डॉक्टर हार्ट का आया था उसने बोला ये खाओ, ये आज डॉक्टर आ जाए बोला मत खाओ. So we have to just balance it out. Same thing in the dessert, milk dessert, custard, pudding, ice cream, they are very, very rich in calcium. So avoid that. Other techniques avoiding same thing basically. Cystine, as I was telling you, one of those hard stones. Fortunately, they are rare stones. They are not very commonly found. But the measurement of, you need to measure the daily cystine excretion in the urine, increasing urine pH above 7.5. Urine output has to be more than 3 liters. Dietary restriction of methionine as a last resort. Penicillamine complication prevents its use, and MPG in daily dose. Because the treatment of this cystinuria itself is a complicated one. So unfortunately, the cystine stones are not very, very common. So one need not worry much about it. Same thing, if you have a calcium stones, you have a absorptive hypercalciuria, that is type 1, you can use these diuretics. Absorptive hypercalciuria type 2, these are technical things. I will not bother you about this thing. That urologists also do some work for you. If you do every work yourself, then urologists will probably be out of job. Absorptive, there are different types of hypercalciuria, hyperuricemia and things like that. These are the, in an extreme cases. Now these things are not applied in day to day. These conditions, we go into the depth of it when somebody we have just treated a stone, within 3 months he has formed new stones. Somebody who is a young 25-30 individual come with multiple stones full in both the kidneys. We treat them and again after 6 months or a year, he again comes up with both the kidneys. Then we know that there is some metabolic cause inside the body which is going on, which is letting. So there the prevention takes a major role. But if somebody at your age, at 50, 60 or 70 comes with the first time stone, I'm not going to put any restrictions on them. Because if you have taken 50 years to form one stone, you will take another 50 years to form second stone. Then we will meet somewhere and we'll treat that stone. So there is no need to absolutely get paranoid about this kind of things. These are there for the knowledge. But just because somebody, see what happens when we give a lecture, they all go home and they say, okay, my 25-year-old guy has got a stone, poor fellows, all khana pina is band. And still again next year he forms a stone. Then the patient is disturbed, the relatives are disturbed, the doctor is disturbed. They said, why if I had to form stone, why did you put a restriction onto me? So the whole theory doesn't work that way. So I only tell them that focus more on taking more liquids rather than in restricting the foods. Your focus should be more on, if you are allowed to take more liquid, then focus more on taking more water. That could be plain water, barley water, coconut water, nibu pani, lemonade, whatever. But instead of otherwise, what happens? अरे पानी तो है, बाद में बताओ ना क्या नहीं खाने का. कोई बोलेगा टमाटो नहीं खाने का, कोई बोलेगा पालक नहीं खाने का. These are all myths. You don't take one spinach or you don't take one this thing and straight away form a stone. It takes you years to form a stone. So, and all these restrictions have come from the Western world. Those guys who live on a salad bowl, they don't eat roti, dal, bhat, sabji like you and me eat. So for them, that is their meal, subah, dopar, sham. So they eat that kind of food. So for them, that is because they are consuming that in excess. How many tomatoes, if you are eating tomatoes, first of all, the tomato does not form a stone. And even if suppose you have it, how many, you have 2 slices, maximum 3 slices. खाने के साथ में थोड़ा सा सॉल्ट में डुबाया, आधा बाइट खाया, रख दिया बाजू. फिर दूसरा चपाती के साथ में दूसरा आधा बाइट. Now that is never going to form. If you have half a dozen tomatoes in one day, then I understand. But tomato, for example, or anything, say spinach or palak or whatever you think that this can be stored. You get up in the morning, you order ice cream. You go out in the sun, you are sweated, dehydrated. Instead of drinking water, you stop by at an ice cream parlor or do choco cone kha liya, then you are in trouble. But otherwise, you are not in trouble. Medical therapy, similarly, the hyperuricosuria or hypocitraturia, you can have that. Hyperoxaluria, these are all technical things. So everything, whether it's calcium, oxalate, uric acid or cysteine, either you can have more of those substances into the blood or you have more of those substances passing via urine through the filtration system. In those cases, you may form this kind of a stones. So these are basically the, say, uric acid stone in, everywhere. The story will come the same. Increase fluid intake, decrease dietary purine, means here you have to increase, there you have to reduce and finish. That is all. And plus some drugs will help you do that. Sorry? Purine basis. There are certain articles which is not in our diet generally.
Dietary purine, decrease dietary purine.
That's what I'm saying. Purine, we hardly have purine. Some of those spinach and things like that we have it. But otherwise, the substances which are rich in uric acid is something called fish. Fish is very, very rich in uric acid. So somebody, and another best part about the uric acid that it gives you 2 diseases. One, it forms a stone, and the second, it gives you gout. And it is a well-known fact that the fellow who will get a gout will not get a stone. And the fellow who will get a stone will not get a gout. You show me a person today who has got high uric acid and who says, I've got a gout and the stone both. I have not seen. So somehow the God has devised our body. If there is an excessive uric acid, either the bones will take the brunt or your kidneys will take the brunt. Both will never be affected. These are all various kind of a different stone. You can do the chemolysis, and this is medical therapy, same thing again. I'm not going to repeat that. Calcium stone, uric acid and stones. Avoid excess of stone pudding, like say for example in the purines you have red meat, yes, you can have poultry, organ meats and wine. But we are, even if we are there, we don't eat that kind of a red meat what the Western world. That's why I say our diet is not that rich in this. Sodium, table salt or seasoned salt, other foods, the high in salt like canned foods, cheese, processed meats, soya sauce, anchovies, we don't use this kind of a diet. Oxalate, colas, nuts, this we use quite a lot. That's why in our country we have primarily we have calcium oxalate and uric acid stones. So this is why colas, nuts, chocolates, dark green leafy vegetables, rhubarb, beets, okra, especially high in oxalates. All cheeses and milk, they are high in calcium. Bhindi is सबके घर में हर second day बनती है, but then there you are consuming something. Inhibitors are citrate, lemonade, magnesium and other preparations. So these are the few basic things. I will not go too much into detail of it, but these are the basically, in short, is the fluid and fluid. You can take many, we do get these pharmaceutical companies who kind of come and give us a lot of these solutions. Potassium citrate, sodium citrate, combination with B1, B6 and these things. But I have yet to see that any of these things have guaranteedly prevented a stone formation. These are conditions where we have a nephrocalcinosis, or for example in those kind of conditions whereby we use this potassium citrate solution. I have had a patient who I am following it now for almost 25 years. When that young girl, when she was, it must be in her late 20s, got married and came to me with both the kidneys were showing stones. Means they were into the parenchyma, more of a calcification. That condition is called nephrocalcinosis. The gynecologist told her, don't have a baby. Your child will have nephrocalcinosis and you are finished, both your kidneys. You have a couple of years to go on. So we say you will be on dialysis and you will. Today she is about 30 years. I had put her on that time at potassium citrate. I did a lot of research. I said, how can you write off such a young girl? And we do nothing about it. So I studied and researched and then finally I came across, we made our cocktail. She was very, she said, doctor, whatever you will do, I will do it. I want to get married, I want to have babies and I want to live a normal life. You tell me what is to be done. So I went and researched for her, took out a solution, itna gram. We made this solution. I told her, gave a prescription. I said, itna gram, I don't know how to make it. She said, doctor, that's my job. She would go to the market, get the ingredients, itna milligram, ye, itna gram, ye, sab khichdi pichdi, bana ke solution bana. I said, pure. Till date, she is drinking that. And she has got married, she's got 3 children, her creatinine has not risen, she still has those things. She lives a normal life, 25 years, her girls are getting married. I just got an invitation for a marriage of one of her daughters. And you know, it's so satisfying. But so these things are not absolutely to be written off, but you have to have a very specific indication to use where. Just because somebody has a stone formation, you don't pump in potassium citrate solution for 25 years into him. That's criminal. I think you will follow what, if I tell you to take it, you will continue drinking forever. But if you have an indication, then yes, otherwise not. Real space flight. We are not talking about the space flight. So summary points: if you have a hypercalciuria, that is more of a calcium into the urine, you give thiazide and potassium citrate solution. If you have a normal calciuria, potassium citrate alone. Alkalinized citrate therapy improves residual stone fragmentation clearance. It not only decreases the stone of the formation but also maintains normal citrate levels in the urine. Can be used up to 2.78 years mean, with a remission rate of 94. These are all theoretical, basically coming from the Western world. We don't have any of our statistics in this country because we don't have that kind of a registry. And that's about it. If you have any further questions on this, I'll be happy to answer. But basically what we have talked about is how stone presents, what are the types of the stone, how the stone is presented, how do you investigate or the diagnose, what are the types of stones, what are the types of treatment, and finally how do you prevent future stone formation.